like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure when he will introduce vehicle excise duty on electric vehicles.
The Minister for Infrastructure, Mr Harmer.
Thank you, Mr President. Zero emissions vehicles are currently not charged for vehicle tax. However, the Vehicle Duty Order 2018 will bring in a charge of £14 in April 2020.
Supplementary, Mrs Corlett.
Thank you, Mr President. The number of electric vehicles on the road is increasing, but only account for a tiny proportion of all vehicles registered, not really making a marked impact on the number of petrol and diesel cars. Does the Minister believe that zero to low road tax is actually incentivising people to buy electric vehicles?
Reply, sir.
Thank you. The jury's out on how things are incentivised. I do think generally having electric vehicles at a lower rate will incentivise. Obviously, we don't have a subsidy scheme here. There is a debate of whether we should have zero for vehicle duty for electric, or whether there should be a nominal charge. The Department's view is effectively it should be small, and we will be bringing, or hope to bring a vehicle duty order in February. Tim will, which will expand that further.
Member Dr Allinson.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Minister agree that with the increasing number of different ranges of models available, that people will be buying electric vehicles in the future, particularly next year, not because they're necessarily electric, but because they're just very good cars, and the affordability of these will improve as manufacturers go far more mainstream in terms of EVs, and so the use of public subsidies and public inducements, whether that be through taxation or rebates on various charges like road tax, will be unnecessary in the future.
Thank you, Mr President, and that's a really important point. It really encapsulates the thrust of the point, is that any discount should be short-lived. Vehicle duty vehicles are improving, they are becoming cheaper. Yes, it's good to incentivise where we can, but I think ultimately other reasons will be the reasons why people buy vehicles. We all know that we need to move to a new environment with electric vehicles and electric heaters and so forth, but we also have to raise vehicle duty to maintain our roads. So it is a difficult balance.
Honourable Member Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr President. The Minister just confirmed he is bringing in a charge for electric vehicles for next year. Currently, VD is emissions-based, so the charge you pay is linked to the emissions your car produces. Can he advise if he's moving away from this emissions-based system, and if not, what the basis is for actually including zero-emission vehicles within an emissions-based charging structure?
Thank you. Thank you. I won't probably go into debate of vehicle duty at this point, but what I was trying to emphasise was the fact that whilst a zero rate seems good and very much something I support, I do understand some concerns that people have that if you make it zero, that's not fair because there's an administrative charge. Also, at some point, and this will come out very much as we move to electric vehicles, that the vehicle duty will rapidly the amount that you actually obtain from vehicle duty due to emissions will rapidly decrease over the next 10 years. So you have to be mindful of that in any preparation of the vehicle duty, and that's really the point I'm making.
Supplementary question, Mrs Corlett.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm not questioning the need to incentivise. What I'm questioning is, pardon the pun, is this the vehicle to do it with? Bearing in mind that last year's consultation on the possible future uses for car tax showed that most people disagreed with car tax being used to influence or reward particular buying decisions. As revenue is collected from car tax is used to maintain and repair roads, would you agree that every vehicle should contribute fairly?
Minister to reply.
Thank you. Without going into sort of a detailed and an analysis, and we have done a consultation, we have taken that sort of feedback, we are taking in the impact of Professor James Curran's report and so forth. All of these impacts actually develop it, but the two things remain. Number one, the highways need to be repaired. Number two, we need the money to do that. Now, with respect to electric vehicles, I understand the concerns regarding making it zero, but I do think there is a period where, and this will be reflected in that, where they should reduce, have a reduced amount. The point is, we all want to encourage people to do that But ultimately, we do need a self-sustaining scheme, and a self-sustaining scheme that actually raises the money.
Honourable Member Mr Shimmons.
Thanks very much, Mr President. I'd like to ask the Minister, what is the administration cost of processing an individual vehicle tax? Is it possible that this could actually be higher than the £14 he's proposing, and it might actually be financially better to leave it at zero for a while?
Minister to reply.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, a good point is that you have to start somewhere. I just think it's the principle that people have that you shouldn't necessarily make it zero. But we haven't finalised the decision on that. I'm just reflecting the position that a number of people have had concerns that it should perhaps not be zero. Well, all I'm saying at this point, it will be zero or very low.
Growing list of supplementary questions on this topic. We'll keep things brief, please. Questions and answers. Honourable Member Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I didn't really get a straight answer from the Minister when I asked if he was moving away from an emissions-based structure. The reason I asked that question was specifically because as more and more cars are becoming electric on the roads, we are going to need a new way of paying. The UK has moved to a flat rate style system. I'm just wondering whether he's actually looking forward and designing a new vehicle tax system that is going to be fit for the future, or if he's just tweaking with the current system in response to some complaints or concerns people have raised. Is it not better to take a wider, more strategic approach and say, let's develop a vehicle tax system that does adequately fund our roads and does take into account the growing prevalence of EV vehicles on the road?
I couldn't agree more, and that's where our analysis and where we're looking at is a sustainable thing for the future. We're not tweaking, I can assure the honourable member, we're not tweaking to a system, but I haven't yet got it through all the approval processes, so I can't actually at this point say what scheme we're bringing forward. But certainly from the department's point of view, we are very keen to have a radical system that will take us through to the future.
Supplementary, Mrs Corlett.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Minister agree that the current charging system benefits those who are better off and can afford to buy new cars, but stings those less well off because they're unable to afford to upgrade their vehicles? Those people on low incomes who can only afford to buy old vehicles are often the ones who are paying the most road tax. But would he agree that these are the people who can least afford it?
Completely, and I say I don't really want to descend into because we've not presented to members the ideas and thinkings that we've come up with, but the concept of fair transition is a very key point in terms of that. As I said to you before, the main thing for vehicle duty is if we raise less in vehicle duty, we have less money to spend on roads. It's really as simple as that, and that's a fundamental issue. And I am very aware that the very people who can least afford it tend to have older cars and so forth. However, we're all committed to a greener planet. It's a really difficult tightrope to develop a system that does that. I think we've achieved that, but that has to go through various approvals and so forth. And a scheme, which I hope will be radical, will come later next year. Early next year. It just depends on if we can gain a consensus. It may be that we have to, but if we don't do anything, we will have to put up vehicle duty by quite a considerable amount each year, just to maintain the current income. So we'd be having to put up vehicle duty by 5-10% purely just to maintain the revenue, because people are buying, as they buy new cars, they tend to have less emissions.
Supplementary question, Mr Baker.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Minister also agree that some of the difficulties around vehicle duty and the links to road maintenance is going to be faced by Treasury over the coming years in terms of fuel duty, where the island's income is quite significantly positively benefited by fuel duty on petrol, and that's another challenge that we're going to have to grasp with as we adapt to the new order around environmental responsibility. And secondly, that whilst car tax is a very emotive subject, the amount of money that people spend on car tax is a very, very small proportion of the total cost of ownership of vehicles, and that it needs to be looked at in the round in that context.
Reply, sir.
Yes, I think first of all, the vehicle duty is a percentage of the overall figure. Actual vehicle duty, fuel duty is by far the bigger driver. It's 3 times as much, if I recall from memory correctly. as I said, the main point again, it's about raising the money that we need to provide for the roads, and we will provide, and it's a difficult balance in terms of all the other demands, but fundamentally has to be a system that delivers the income so that we can maintain the roads.
Supplementary, Mrs. Paul Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Minister agree with me that in bringing forward any changes, it's very important to take account of the various points that have been raised in here today and the balancing issues, but that I think he mentioned February as an order coming forward, and if there were to be wider questions that came out of forward planning around climate change generally, that those would be taken into account before any changes are brought forward to this court?
Thank you. Thank you. It's an aspiration at this point. Please don't hold me to February, but we will need to. But all of the conversations we had in this court, all those consultations, we did a full consultation, quite detailed. It had quite a large number of responses. All of that will be taken into account. But I think there's two parts of it. There's one part where we need to actually increase the car vehicle duty just to maintain our current level, which is important, but also we need to have an eye on the future, and it is a really difficult balance to get, and it's good to have this I would say mini debate today, because it does put on record some of the views that people have, which coincides with some of the other analysis around what Professor Curran was doing. I think we can get something that if we put signals out to the future of how we can, and it's not just about electric vehicles, this has become a much wider debate now, it's around diesel vehicles, it's all sorts of different issues, and we need to address those. But I think, provided we can give a good transition, then it will be a fair transition, so that's really the route we're taking.
Supplementary question, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Minister for his openness today in confirming that there's going to be a radical new scheme next year. But that people might be fearful that that just simply means that all vehicle tax duties are going to increase. And would he agree that if people felt the roads were being maintained to a good standard, there would be less dissatisfaction with the constant increase in road tax? Can he confirm what the differential is between what's brought in and what is needed to be spent on the roads? And when he brings in his radical new scheme, will they have one eye on the comparable figures for the vehicles in the UK? Because it seems to be a creeping separation between much higher rates of vehicle duty on the Isle of Man compared with the UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. This has become a question about vehicle duty, and actually the question was, will he introduce vehicle excise duty on electric vehicles, which is what I've said. I'm minded to maybe retain a small charge or thereabouts. Regarding, as I say, this has now become a wider issue. No change will be done overnight. It would be really signposting, and I don't have any approvals for any of these at this point. There are ideas in the department, and they may just stay there. So it really. But in terms of what I'm just signposting, the fact that if we just retained the current system as is, over time we would have to increase the road tax quite significantly, because people are moving to lower emissions cars. Now, in terms of, and now this is talking about road maintenance and so forth. Yes, it's all the money that goes into for vehicle duty goes into road maintenance. There's been no increase this year at all. The increases over the last few years actually have been relatively modest. And we're not trying to necessarily, we're aware that if we don't do anything, then the amount of income we will get each year will drop as people move from older cars to new cars. So there's a definitive problem which does need to be addressed.
Final supplementary question, Mr. Peake.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I had the contacted the Department of Infrastructure the other day to find out we have a total of 309 electric vehicles registered on the Isle of Man currently at November 19, and that the target for the Isle of Man government on the policy for electric vehicles is 10,000 within 10 years. So we've still got quite a long way to go. But the running cost of electric cars are very cheap, and people can choose to lease a vehicle and still get zero road tax. So would the Minister agree with me that this zero road tax is just a nudge to get people into electric vehicles that we do desperately want?
Reply, sir.
Thank you. I take that point on board, and that's the balance. So we have it. As I say, it'll either be zero or be small, but the nudge is there. But obviously, it can't be there forever, because eventually we have to raise the